My area of specialty is 20th century American lit and culture. I stress and add the culture because unlike many English professors, I spend more time analyzing visual texts than I do print ones, and sometimes bringing them into conversation with one another. If I was hard-pressed to list a specific area that I usually publish in, I would say media studies, television scholarship, sometimes feminist theory, and almost always popular culture. My early work has been in the area of comparative media study. This means I like to study how one mediated format differs from another. So how does a TV show work differently than a film or a book when consumed and received by an audience or reader? For example, one of my favorite arguments to make is the difference between an isolated or singular text and a dependent or sequential text. For example, an isolated text would be something you could consume in one instance. You could sit down and read a book from front to back, or you could watch a 2-hour feature film in one sitting, versus a sequential text, which means that you have to consume it in multiple segments, like a television show stretched out over 20 installations in a single season, or a comic book that you might follow once a week for years, or a series like Harry Potter that has 7 different parts to it, or the daytime dramas that never go off the air that you can watch every day. And although the canon usually privileges isolated texts, great one-hit wonder films or novels, I like to argue that perhaps there's some great value in the sequential texts because they interact with us more regularly and sometimes become part of our daily habit. My most recent publication was in a book titled Grace Under Pressure, Grey's Anatomy Uncovered, and the chapter I contributed dealt with trying to figure out what exact genre Grey's Anatomy is. And in the end, I argued that like most postmodern televisual texts, it is a hybrid. It's doing the work of situational comedies like Scrubs, and the medical dramas like ER, and it kind of has a sudsy melodrama feel like the soap operas with love triangles and characters returning from the dead. And I argue that this is actually kind of useful because in having this hybrid genre, what comes to be is a coalition audience, people that are watching for different reasons. And because Grey's Anatomy arguably is doing some feminist work, it's definitely dealing with women's issues, it's doing so and reaching a larger audience, and I find that quite interesting. In the next year, I have 2 chapters coming out in different publications. The first is Writing the Digital Generation, and the chapter I am contributing deals with soap opera fandom and how the internet has basically changed how we talk about the text that we follow. And it doesn't have to just be a soap. Back in the day, when you used to watch a television show, you'd go call your friends and you'd talk at their water cooler with your colleagues about it the next day. Now, 2 seconds later, you can log on and you can have a conversation via the electronic page with someone across the globe. And that's kind of changing how the producers and the writers change their shows based on the feedback they receive. And the soap opera is very unique in the fact that it is so quick to respond. It is only shooting episodes about 3 weeks to couple months after you are watching them, so they are able to quickly drop storylines and adapt them based on viewer preferences. The second publication I have coming out is probably the one I'm most excited about. It's an anthology called American Literature After the American Century, and so it's dealing with texts of the 21st century. And funny enough, I'm not actually talking about literature at all. I'm talking about television. My chapter is called How to Save a Nation, Televisual Fiction Post 9/11. And in this article, I am studying how the small screen responded to the attacks of September 11th. What I did is I looked at the year of 2006 and the fall lineup of the major networks and a few others and analyzed them to see how many shows were actually dealing with issues like national security, surveillance, interconnectedness, fate, destiny, or the do-over, wanting to go back in time and fix things. And I found out that 29 shows were actually focusing in on this in very obvious and sometimes subtle ways. The obvious ones would make sense to you: 24, saving the day in just a few hours with Jack Bauer, or Alias, or The Unit. Some that dealt with the government and seeing behind the scenes like West Wing or Commander-in-Chief, but other shows did it in very surprising ways. For example, I spent more time analyzing ABC's Lost and NBC's Heroes, which were very popular during that time period, to see how they were doing it in ways that might not jump out at you, to basically argue that our entertainment outlets are remediating the tragedy and working through cultural concerns even years later.